one of the things that makes, in my opinion, humans different is community. And we are a tribal species. We are, look at all across the globe, regardless of, and I'm not just talking Americans, like all across the globe, people are tribal. People like themselves. And that's not super rocket science. There's lots of research on the tribal nature of humans. And when you create systems and processes that go against, and in my opinion, eventually lead to the breakdown of those bonds, relationships, community, tribes, what are the long-term consequences of isolating human beings for any length of time? Well, we just had massive global and national case study on what happens when you isolate relational social beings like us. Hey, what is going on, EQ gangsters? So this podcast was formerly EQ for Entrepreneurs. We have recently undergone, and quite frankly are still undergoing, a rebrand, remodel for EQ for Entrepreneurs, now transitioning to EQ Gangsters. Our membership is going to be called the EQ Mafia. And so for those of y'all that would like to join that community, join that membership, where we're going to have lots of amazing content, actually already have amazing content, is eqgangster.com/mafia. eqgangster.com/mafia. And thank you all so much for rating, reviewing, subscribing, sharing helpful episodes, impactful episodes. Today, I want to talk about the silent pandemic, some of the silent consequences of COVID and what has been going on. Now, those of you who have been following our podcast for any length of time, any amount of time, know that this is not a political podcast, and this episode is not going to be a political podcast. I do want to discuss the emotional consequences of some of the decisions that have been made by governments, countries' governments, local governments, and the emotional impacts that have happened. That again, this is not opinion. This is not hype. This is not conspiracy. These are legitimate facts and or conversations that I have had with people from that know about the different scenarios I'm going to be talking about. And I think, again, the dynamic and aspect that is so often overlooked and maybe even misunderstood are the emotional consequences of some of the decisions that governments have made and even businesses have made. So I just got done talking to two very close folks in my life, and I'll keep them no named just for privacy's sake. I did not talk to them about, hey, I'm going to use some of our conversation in my podcast and stuff. So I want to, protect their privacy. Now, at some point, if they say, hey, that's fine, then, maybe I'll do another episode and I'll share their names and all that kind of stuff. But for right now, I will not mention their names. There's not a person on the planet that has probably not been impacted to some degree by the past 12 to 18 months of COVID, regardless of where you live in the globe, and to varying degrees, because again, different countries have reacted very differently to what's been going on. What has been fascinating for me, and again, I have been a very non-political person for most of my life, because I just feel like, and I'll maybe share a little bit of my personal opinions. I just feel like so many politicians say whatever they think people want to hear, and then do whatever they're going to do anyway. So regardless of what their constituents want, or what they just say what is going to sound good on TV or on their interview, and then they make whatever decision that they want to keep themselves in power. Now, that's probably a little jaded. And, I think there is some truth to that. Is that how every politician is? Probably not. There's probably some good ones out there. I don't know. I just have because I've kind of held that kind of philosophy, I have kind of avoided politics as a result of that kind of thought process or philosophy, personal philosophy. Now, again, I've got friends that are conservatives. I have friends that are liberals. I've got friends who are libertarians. I've got friends in socialist countries, and so again, for me, if you know me, I love everybody, and I'm not just saying that. If you know me, you know that's the truth. And so, and I absolutely have my own beliefs and my own values and that kind of thing that I feel very strongly about. But again, regarding politics, I just have really kind of stayed out of politics for a long time. And so, but a conversation I had just this weekend over, ironically, 4th of July weekend in the U.S. with two very close friends of mine that are both both from more socialism oriented countries than the U.S. So neither one of them are from the U.S. Although they are both now U.S. citizens, they're both from countries that, again, are more socialist oriented, and both of them shared a dynamic that has happened in the last 12 to 18 months in their countries that I thought was absolutely conspiracy. Like, there is no way this dynamic that you're talking about is actually happening and or happened. There's just no way. And I have said that regarding many different decisions and things that have happened over the past 12 to 18 months, and even before that, past 5 to 10, 15, 20 years in the U.S. that I just would not have ever believed would have happened, that have happened and are happening or have been happening. Both of them shared this dynamic that is going on in their countries or has gone on over the last 12 months, 12 to 18 months. And again, I'm not trying to the purpose of this is not to discuss politics. What I am fascinated about is the emotional consequences, the emotional impact in people with the following scenario. Both of them from two different countries shared this dynamic that has happened in their countries over the past 12 to 18 months. They shared that their countries penalized and fined to the tune of between $500 to $1,500 people that got together during the lockdowns. So, and rewarded the neighbors that would rat out there are other neighbors that were seen getting together with friends or family members during the lockdowns that were going on. So now again, you may think, hey, that's a great idea. We should fine everybody that violated the COVID lockdown or future COVID lockdowns. Or some of you may say, dude, that's crazy. I can't believe that folks would fine their neighbors or would rat out their neighbors, and those neighbors that were getting together would get fined to the tune of $500 or $1,500, and then the person that was doing the ratting out, that would rat out their neighbors, would get paid $500 to $1,500 for ratting out their neighbors. So whether you're for or against that, what interests me is, in this particular conversation, is the emotional impact and the emotional consequences of penalizing a relational social species like us humans for getting together and rewarding folks within the community to rat out friends, family members, relatives, that kind of thing, for violating this whole dynamic of getting together. One other interesting dynamic that one of my friends communicated from his particular country, what was happening is, as a result of all these neighbors and stuff ratting out all their other neighbors for getting together, the suicide rate among everybody, but especially single people, was going so high that they started to allow single people only to visit like immediate family members, on a limited basis for an extra period of time, whatever. But that was it. Only single people were allowed to, because the suicide rate was going so high. And it's so for me, what do you guys think the emotional consequences would be within that community of getting penalized and or rewarded? Penalized for getting together, like fined for getting together, rewarded for ratting out friends, family, neighbors. What would be the emotional consequences, short-term and long-term, for that community? Again, whether or not you agree with the policies, because clearly a lot of people were following those, because a lot of folks got fined, a lot of folks got rewarded. And for me, again, from an emotional intelligence standpoint, emotional health standpoint, one of the things that makes, in my opinion, humans different is community. And we are a tribal species. We are, look at all across the globe, regardless of, and I'm not just talking Americans, like all across the globe, people are tribal. People like themselves. And that's not super rocket science. There's lots of research on the tribal nature of humans. And when you create systems and processes that go against, and in my opinion, eventually lead to the breakdown of those bonds, relationships, community, tribes, what are the long-term consequences of isolating human beings for any length of time? Well, we just had massive global and national case study on what happens when you isolate relational social beings like us. And one of the things that I think is interesting is, well, let me say some facts first. So regarding the silent pandemic, addiction has gone up double or triple percentages over the past 12 to 18%. Domestic violence, domestic abuse has gone up double, triple percentages over the last 12 to 18 months. Depression has gone up double, triple percentages over the past 12 to 18 months. Suicide has gone up double, triple percentages over the past 12 to 18 months. In the city of Colorado Springs, one of the hospitals declared a state of emergency for 10 to 18-year-olds within the last 3 months because of the amount of depression and suicide among children 10 to 18 years old. Now, I know 98% of the media, at least in the United States, is focused on whether or not you should wear masks and whether or not you should get vaccinated. I find it so interesting that the media is not talking about the silent pandemic that I just ran through the numbers about. It's mind-boggling to me that the media is not talking about this. When you isolate and lock down social, relational, emotional beings for extended periods of time, it is not healthy. It's not healthy. It's not healthy. And so, which makes me wonder what the motive is then. What else is behind this? What else is getting communicated? What's going on? And again, I'm not a political guy. I'm not into politics. I don't understand, what's going on here. It just does not make sense to me. It just doesn't make sense to me. Because again, here's another so the other thing I was going to say is, in a maximum security prison, what is the number one form of torture, at least, or maybe that's not the right verbiage. The number one form of discipline maybe would be the more appropriate way to say it, in a maximum security prison among convicted felons? Isolation for 23 hours a day. And I think they get like an hour where they can walk outside or walk in the yard or something like that. Maximum security is isolation. The number one form of discipline is isolating that particular inmate from the rest of the community of inmates. And sure enough, that's what we did in so many countries across the globe, seemingly, again, in my opinion, seemingly ignoring the emotional and mental consequences for making that decision. And maybe countries could say, yeah, but we have a whole lot less people dying of COVID, and that may be the case, yet every other number has gone through the roof. Suicide, domestic abuse, depression, children, all those are the numbers I just ran through. So I think that we need to look at the emotional consequences of some of these decisions that are being made among governments, and wonder why. Like, what? Okay, if this is leading to this whole other menu and portfolio of negative, tragic consequences, why are we not talking about this stuff? because, in my opinion, obviously this is my space, being in the emotional health, emotional intelligence space. Emotional health, in my opinion, and mental health is as important as physical health. And also, in my opinion, in my unprofessional opinion, they're connected. When I have been depressed, I am not doing a lot of physical exercise, and I am not physically active when I have been depressed throughout my lifetime, when I've had my bouts with depression and stuff. So now again, I'm not a professional, a psychiatrist or psychologist or therapist. So do your own research. I just think that we all need to look at and be aware of the consequences of some of the decisions of our governments and lawmakers, and really do a hard look at some of these things, because and then also take a much, to really work on our self-awareness and social awareness, which, empathy is in there, interpersonal relationships is in there, emotional self-expression is in there, to really evaluate how we're doing. How are we doing? I just was on a podcast, a week or two ago, a millennial men's podcast by a guy named Fire Breathing Rob, super guy, young guy, and he shared on our interview, the first time he'd ever admitted it to his own podcast audience, that the last few months, he has started to experience the consequences of being locked up and isolated the past 12 months. He shared, again, I told him, I said, man, I appreciate your vulnerability and transparency, but shared how he was really experiencing a lot of social anxiety and other anxieties and stressors as a result of being isolated for the last 12 months. And, mask up. Well, no, that one mask isn't good enough. You need 2 masks. Well, get vaccine. Well, vaccine's not good enough, so you need to wear your vaccine plus a mask. And you're basically going to need your vaccine and a mask, and double mask. Like, what are the emotional consequences here? It just does not seem like anybody is thinking about and talking about the emotional and mental consequences of some of these decisions that are being made. So what I encourage everyone to do is pay attention to yourself, see how you're doing, pay attention to your friends, your family members, see how they're doing, and really be intentional to stay connected. Whatever that means to you, stay connected relationally, because there are massive, drastic consequences if you isolate yourself, lock yourself in your house or in your room, whatever, and do not stay connected to your social network. And I don't mean social media, but social network. There are drastic and tragic consequences if you do not stay connected relationally and socially to that network. Our social and relational network serves as a massive emotional and mental support network that plays a massive role. Now we are realizing more than ever before how vital a role that social and relational network plays in our lives. Again, we've had a 12 to 18 month case study that very, very few people are talking about. But if you Google it, just Google, don't believe me, Google it yourself. The amount of emotional and mental trauma that first responders are experiencing, that law enforcement officers are experiencing, that medical folks are experiencing, that children are experiencing, that adults are experiencing. Like, do your own research, and absolutely would love to hear your thoughts on this. Thank you again for rating, reviewing, liking, subscribing, sharing our podcast, our YouTube channel. Thank you for your patience with us as we're going through this rebrand and remodel. If you don't deal with your emotional issues, your friends, your family, your colleagues, your coworkers, your company will. Unaddressed emotional issues don't get better over time. They actually compound. Emotionally healthy people help heal other people emotionally. If you want to be a part of the EQ Mafia, be a part of that community that is actively growing their emotional health and emotional intelligence, please check out eqgangster.com/mafia.